The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered fields of the Henderson farm, where drought-cracked earth told the story of 3 failed harvests in a row. Martha Henderson knelt in what used to be her vegetable garden, her calloused hands searching through the brittle soil for anything that might still grow. The mortgage payment notice, crumpled in her back pocket, seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute, its red ink a reminder that 30 days was all that stood between her family and losing everything. "Nothing," she whispered to herself, sitting back on her heels and wiping the sweat from her forehead with the back of her dirt-stained sleeve. The tomato plants that should have been thriving in July hung like skeletal remains, their leaves browned and curled despite her desperate attempts to keep them alive with precious well water. The sound of her husband David's boots crunching across the gravel driveway made her look up. His shoulders sagged under the weight of another rejection, another closed door, another "we're not hiring right now" from the feed store in town. At 42, David had worked this land his entire adult life, just as his father had before him and his grandfather before that. Now, watching him approach with defeat written across his weathered face, Martha felt something crack inside her chest. "No luck?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. David shook his head, removing his faded baseball cap and running his fingers through hair that had gone gray far too early. "Henderson's been farming this valley for 3 generations, Martha. I should be able to provide for my family." His voice carried the weight of a man who'd spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating numbers that never seemed to add up. Their daughter, Emma, appeared in the doorway of their small farmhouse, her 8-year-old frame dwarfed by the oversized school clothes that Martha had bought, hoping she'd grow into them. The child's eyes held a wisdom that no 8-year-old should possess, the kind that comes from overhearing whispered conversations about money and grown-up worries late at night. "Mama, there's no more cereal," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying across the yard with heartbreaking matter-of-factness. Martha's throat tightened. They'd been stretching everything, watering down the milk, making sandwiches with the thinnest possible layer of peanut butter, and turning dinner into a creative exercise in making something from nearly nothing. She forced a smile onto her face, the kind of smile that mothers perfect when the world is falling apart around them, but their children need to believe everything will be okay. "We'll figure something out, sweetheart. We always do." If you're invested in seeing how Martha's desperate situation unfolds, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think she should do next. But as Emma disappeared back into the house, Martha caught David's eye, and in that shared glance passed a conversation they'd had too many times before. How long could they keep telling their daughter that everything would be fine? How long could they keep believing it themselves? The heat was becoming unbearable, even in the shade of the old oak tree that had stood sentinel over the Henderson farm for over a century. Martha decided to move her futile gardening efforts to the north side of the house, where the morning shadows lasted longest. She'd noticed that a section of ground there stayed softer than the rest, as if water somehow collected beneath the surface despite the drought that had turned most of their land into something resembling concrete. As she knelt down and began working the soil with her small garden spade, the metal struck something that definitely wasn't dirt. The sound rang out sharp and hollow, like knocking on wood, but deeper somehow, more resonant. She paused, frowning, and struck the spot again. The same sound echoed back at her, unmistakable now. "David," she called, her voice carrying a note of curiosity that hadn't been there in months. "David, come here for a minute." He approached, wiping his hands on his jeans, and Martha pointed to the spot where her spade had hit the mysterious surface. "There's something down there, something solid." David knelt beside her and took the spade, striking the ground with more force. The hollow sound rang out again, and this time they could both feel the vibration through the earth. Whatever was down there was big, and it was close to the surface, Probably just an old septic tank, David said, but his voice carried a hint of excitement that Martha hadn't heard in far too long. The house is old enough. Could be from the 1920s or something. Together, they began to dig. The work was backbreaking in the heat, but there was something almost therapeutic about it, something that felt productive after months of feeling helpless. Sweat poured down their faces as they carved away layers of packed earth, revealing what appeared to be a wooden surface underneath. Emma had come outside to watch, perching herself on the porch steps with a glass of water that she'd drawn from the kitchen tap. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "We're not sure, honey," Martha replied, pausing to catch her breath, "but we found something buried under here." As more of the wooden surface became visible, it became clear that this wasn't a septic tank at all. The wood was old, incredibly old, but it had been preserved by the packed earth around it. Intricate carvings began to emerge as Martha carefully brushed away centuries of accumulated soil, symbols that looked almost like writing, but unlike anything she'd ever seen before. "Martha," David's voice was barely above a whisper, "look at this." He'd uncovered what appeared to be a corner, and as they followed the wooden structure's edge, it became clear that they'd found some kind of entrance. The carvings grew more elaborate as they worked, depicting scenes that seemed to tell a story, figures in robes, ceremonies around what looked like altars, and symbols that seemed to pulse with meaning, even though neither of them could understand what that meaning might be. The sun was beginning to set by the time they'd fully exposed what was unmistakably a trapdoor. The wood was dark with age, but incredibly well preserved, and the metal hinges, though green with patina, looked sturdy enough to still function. Most remarkably, there was a handle, an ornate bronze ring that had somehow survived whatever centuries this thing had spent buried beneath their yard. "Should we open it?" Martha asked, though she was already reaching for the handle. Something about this discovery had awakened a part of her that she'd forgotten existed, the part that believed in possibilities, in mysteries, in the chance that life might surprise you with something wonderful when you least expected it. David placed his hand over hers on the bronze ring. "Together," he said. They pulled, and after a moment of resistance, the ancient hinges gave way with a groan that seemed to echo from deep within the earth itself. A rush of cool air flowed up from the darkness below, carrying with it a scent that was impossible to place. Not unpleasant, but definitely old, like the smell of libraries and museums, and places where time moved differently. Emma had crept closer, drawn by curiosity that overcame her usual caution. "It's like a secret door," she breathed, peering into the darkness that yawned below them. Martha fumbled in her pocket for her phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the opening. What she saw made her gasp audibly. Stone steps, carved from what looked like solid granite, descended into darkness. The walls on either side were covered in the same intricate carvings they'd found on the wooden door, but these were even more elaborate, even more beautiful. "It's a tunnel," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "David, it's an actual tunnel." But it was more than that, and they all sensed it. This wasn't just some old root cellar or storage space that previous owners had forgotten about. The craftsmanship, the artistry, the sheer scale of what they could see even from the surface, this was something important, something that had been hidden intentionally. The cool air continued to flow up from the depths, and with it came something else. A sound, barely audible, like whispered voices or wind moving through distant chambers. Emma pressed closer to her parents, suddenly aware that they stood at the threshold of something far bigger than their small family's struggles with drought and debt. "We need to go down there," Martha said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "We need to see what this is." David nodded slowly, though she could see the practical concerns warring with curiosity in his expression. "We'll need proper flashlights, and we should probably tell someone where we're going, just in case." But even as he spoke about caution and safety, Martha could see the same fire in his eyes that she felt burning in her own chest. For the first time in months, they had stumbled onto something that might change everything. Something that might offer answers to questions they hadn't even known they should be asking. As they stood there in the gathering twilight, looking down into the mysterious darkness that had been hidden beneath their feet all along, Martha felt a shift inside herself. The woman who had knelt in the dust that morning, searching desperately for something that might grow in hostile soil, was gone. In her place stood someone ready to descend into the unknown, ready to discover what secrets the earth had been keeping. The mortgage notice in her pocket crackled as she moved, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel like the weight of the world. Instead, it felt like paper. Just paper. Something that belonged to a smaller story than the one they were about to begin. The hardware store flashlights felt inadequate in Martha's hands as she stood at the edge of the tunnel entrance the following morning. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. David had insisted they wait until daylight, that they approach this discovery with proper preparation, but the ancient opening had called to her all through the restless night, like a siren song she couldn't ignore. "Are you sure about this, Martha?" David asked for the third time, adjusting the emergency rope he'd tied around his waist and secured to the old oak tree. His practical nature warred visibly with the same curiosity that burned in his wife's eyes. "We could call the county office, ask if they know anything about old structures on the property." Martha shook her head firmly, her grip tightening on the flashlight. "And then what? They'll tape it off, bring in officials, and we'll lose any chance of finding out what this is ourselves. David, what if there's something down there that could help us? What if this is the answer we've been praying for?" Emma sat cross-legged on the porch, a piece of toast balanced on her knees, their last slice of bread stretched thin with butter. She watched her parents with the solemn intensity that had become her default expression over the past year. "Are you going to find treasure, Mama?" The innocent question hit Martha like a physical blow. Treasure, such a simple word, but it carried the weight of every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, every time she'd had to tell her daughter they couldn't afford something that other families took for granted. If there was even the smallest chance that this tunnel held something valuable, something that could save their farm and secure Emma's future, then Martha would crawl through hell itself to find it. "I don't know what we're going to find, sweetheart, but we won't know unless we look." David sighed, recognizing the determined set of his wife's jaw. 30 years of marriage had taught him that when Martha Henderson made up her mind about something, the universe itself would have to rearrange to accommodate her will. "All right, then. But we go slow, we stay together, and at the first sign of anything dangerous, we come back up." The stone steps were worn smooth by countless footsteps from centuries past. As Martha's boots found purchase on the ancient granite, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air rising from below. Each step echoed in the darkness ahead of them, and their flashlight beams seemed pitifully small against the vast emptiness that surrounded them. The tunnel walls were a masterwork of craftsmanship that took Martha's breath away. The carvings weren't just decorative. They told a story, panel by panel, of people she couldn't identify, living lives she couldn't comprehend. Robed figures gathered around ceremonial fires, their faces raised toward symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the flickering light of the flashlights. Animals that looked almost familiar, but not quite right, as if they were species that had never existed or had been forgotten by the world above. "Look at the precision of this stonework," David whispered, running his fingers along the smooth surface. "Martha, this isn't colonial era. This isn't even medieval. This is something much, much older." 20 steps down, the tunnel leveled out into a corridor that stretched beyond the reach of their lights. The air here was different, not stale as Martha had expected, but fresh somehow, as if it were being circulated by some unseen system. The walls widened, and she began to notice alcoves carved into the stone, each containing artifacts that made her heart race with possibilities. The first alcove held pottery, vessels of clay and what looked like precious metals, decorated with the same mysterious symbols they'd seen on the walls. Some were small, no bigger than her fist, while others could have held several gallons of liquid. The craftsmanship was exquisite, far beyond anything she'd ever seen in museums. And when David's flashlight caught the surface of one particular urn, it gleamed with the unmistakable luster of gold. "David!" she breathed, reaching toward the golden vessel before stopping herself. "Do you see what I see?" He nodded slowly, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. "Gold. Real gold by the look of it. Martha, if there's one piece like this, there might be more. We might be looking at—" He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the hope that was building in both their hearts. They moved deeper into the tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the silence. More alcoves revealed themselves, each containing artifacts that seemed to whisper of incredible age and impossible value. Jewelry that would have made ancient queens weep with envy. Weapons forged from metals that gleamed like silver but felt heavier than iron. Books, actual books, bound in materials Martha couldn't identify, their pages covered in script that flowed like water across the parchment. But it was the murals that truly captured her attention. As they progressed deeper into the tunnel, the wall carvings gave way to paintings of breathtaking beauty and disturbing complexity. Scenes of rituals involving hundreds of participants, their faces upturned toward skies filled with stars arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Cities that had never appeared in any history book, with architecture that seemed to defy the laws of physics as Martha understood them. "Who were these people?" she whispered, her voice carrying in the silence like a prayer. David had stopped walking entirely, his flashlight beam fixed on a particular section of wall. "Martha, you need to see this." She joined him, and her blood ran cold. The mural before them depicted what could only be described as a sacrifice, but not the primitive, brutal kind she might have expected from an ancient culture. This was something far more sophisticated and infinitely more disturbing. Figures in elaborate robes stood in perfect formation around an altar, their hands raised, not in worship, but in what looked like scientific precision. And above them, painted with such skill that it seemed to move in the flickering light of the flashlights, something that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal, but something else entirely. "We should go back," David said quietly. "Martha, this place, there's something not right about it." But Martha found herself drawn deeper into the tunnel, as if pulled by an invisible thread. The practical part of her mind, the part that had spent months calculating grocery budgets and searching for ways to stretch every dollar, whispered urgently about the treasures they'd already seen. One piece of that jewelry, one of those golden urns, would be enough to pay their mortgage. Several pieces might be enough to save the farm entirely. But there was something else pulling her forward, something that had nothing to do with money or practicality. The tunnel seemed to call to her on a level she couldn't explain, as if it had been waiting specifically for her to find it. As if all the events of the past year, the failed harvests, the mounting debt, the desperation that had driven her to dig in that particular spot, had been leading to this moment. The corridor began to widen dramatically, and their flashlight beams started to reveal the edges of what could only be called a chamber. Not just a room, but a vast underground space that seemed to extend far beyond what their lights could illuminate. As they stepped into this larger area, Martha felt a shift in the air pressure, as if they had entered a space so large that it had its own weather system. "Jesus Christ," David breathed, and Martha couldn't bring herself to scold him for the language. The chamber was indeed vast. Their footsteps echoed for what seemed like miles, and when David called out experimentally, his voice bounced back from distances that suggested a space the size of an airplane hangar. But it wasn't empty. Even from the entrance they could see shapes scattered throughout the chamber. More artifacts, larger structures, and what looked like entire sections of wall covered in artwork that made the tunnel murals seem like children's drawings by comparison. The craftsmanship here wasn't just sophisticated, it was otherworldly. Martha played her flashlight beam across the nearest wall and gasped. The entire surface was covered in script, not carved, but somehow embedded in the stone itself, as if the letters had been pressed into the granite while it was still molten. The writing was incredibly dense, covering every available inch of surface, and it seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence that existed at the very edge of human perception. "It's a library," she realized suddenly. "David, this entire chamber is a library." They moved closer to the walls, and Martha could see that the script wasn't random. It was organized, sectioned, as if different portions contained different types of information. Some sections seemed to be narrative, with the flowing quality of storytelling. Others were more rigid, mathematical almost, with symbols that repeated in patterns that suggested formulas or equations. "Martha, look at this." David had discovered what appeared to be a reading area. Stone benches arranged in front of sections of the wall script, positioned at angles that would allow someone to study the writing comfortably. The benches themselves were carved with incredible precision and decorated with symbols that seemed to serve as some kind of organizational system. As Martha approached one of the benches, her flashlight beam caught something that made her heart skip a beat. Lying on the stone surface, as if someone had just set it down moments before, was a scroll. The material looked like parchment, but it was flexible and pristine despite what had to be incredible age, and it was covered in the same script that decorated the walls. "Should we touch it?" David asked, echoing the question that was running through Martha's own mind. Before she could answer, a sound echoed through the chamber that made them both freeze. It was subtle, barely more than a whisper, but it was definitely there. A rustling, like paper being turned or fabric being moved. It seemed to come from deeper in the chamber, from areas their flashlights couldn't reach. "We're not alone down here," David said quietly, his hand finding Martha's in the darkness. Martha felt fear war with curiosity in her chest. Every practical instinct told her to turn and run, to climb those stone steps as fast as her legs could carry her and never look back. But the treasures, the incredible discoveries, the possibility that this place could change their lives forever, it was too much to abandon without understanding what they'd found. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. The rustling sound came again, closer this time, and Martha thought she could hear something else beneath it, a sound like breathing, but not quite human. Too slow, too deep, as if whatever was making it had lungs far larger than anything that should exist. David's grip on her hand tightened. "Martha, we need to leave. Now." But as he spoke, something extraordinary happened. The faint luminescence she had noticed in the wall script began to brighten, as if responding to their presence. The letters and symbols started to glow with a soft, blue-white light that made their flashlights seem suddenly unnecessary. The entire chamber began to reveal itself, section by section, as the glow spread across the walls like ripples on water. What they saw took Martha's breath away completely. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of a cathedral, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into darkness above them. But it wasn't just the size that awed her, it was the organization. This wasn't a random collection of artifacts and writings. This was a carefully curated repository of knowledge, arranged with a sophistication that suggested a civilization far more advanced than anything she'd studied in school. And throughout the chamber, moving with purpose and intelligence, were figures that definitely weren't human. They were tall, graceful in a way that seemed almost liquid, and they moved with the deliberate care of librarians tending to precious books. Their faces, when Martha caught glimpses of them in the growing light, were elongated and beautiful in a way that made her think of classical sculptures, but with features that were just alien enough to remind her that she was looking at something that had never walked under the same sun she knew. One of the figures approached them, and Martha felt David tense beside her, ready to run or fight as necessary. But the being's movements held no threat. Instead, there was something almost welcoming about its approach, as if it had been expecting them. When it spoke, its voice was like wind chimes made of crystal, beautiful and strange, and somehow perfectly understandable, despite not using any language Martha recognized. "Welcome, Martha Henderson," it said, and the sound of her own name in that ethereal voice made her knees weak. "We have been waiting for you for a very long time." Martha's world tilted on its axis as the crystalline voice echoed through the vast chamber. The being before her stood nearly 7 feet tall, its features delicate yet alien, with eyes that held depths of knowledge that made her feel like a child trying to understand calculus. David's hand squeezed her so tightly it hurt, but the pain felt distant, unimportant compared to the impossibility standing before them. "You know my name," Martha managed to whisper, her voice barely audible in the cathedral-like space. The being inclined its head, a gesture human yet performed with such otherworldly grace that it seemed like a dance movement. "We know many things, Martha Henderson. We know of your struggles, your desperation, the love that drives you to desperate measures for your family. We know why you dig in dying earth, searching for hope where none should grow." Around them, other figures moved through the chamber with purpose, tending to sections of the glowing walls, handling artifacts with reverent care. Martha realized she was looking at an entire civilization that existed beneath her feet, hidden from the world above for reasons she couldn't begin to fathom. "What are you?" David found his voice, though it cracked with strain. "What is this place?" The being turned its attention to him, and Martha saw her husband flinch at the intensity of that alien gaze. "We are the keepers, David Henderson, guardians of knowledge that your species lost long before your recorded history began. This place is a repository, a library of truths that were deemed too dangerous for the world above." "Dangerous?" Martha stepped forward, surprised by her own boldness. "What kind of truths?" The keeper's expression, if it could be called that, seemed to shift, becoming somehow sadder. "The truth of what your world once was. The truth of what it could become again. The truth of why we withdrew from the surface and left humanity to find its own path." Another keeper approached, carrying a crystalline tablet that pulsed with the same blue-white light as the walls. The first being accepted it with both hands, cradling it as if it were infinitely precious. When Martha looked at the surface, she saw images moving within the crystal, not carved or painted, but somehow alive, playing out scenes like a movie screen made of light. "Your species called us gods once," the keeper said, holding the tablet where both Martha and David could see. "But we were never that. We were teachers, guides, sharing knowledge that could have elevated your civilization beyond anything you can imagine now. Agriculture that could feed billions without depleting the earth, medicine that could eliminate disease and extend life for centuries, technology that could harness the very forces that move the stars." The images in the crystal showed scenes that took Martha's breath away. cities of impossible beauty rising from landscapes that bloomed with perpetual abundance. People, humans, she realized, working alongside beings like the keepers, their faces radiant with knowledge and purpose, flying vehicles that moved through the air like living things, powered by energies that left no trace of pollution or destruction. "What happened?" she asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. The crystal's images shifted, showing scenes of devastation that made Martha's stomach clench. Cities in flames, landscapes reduced to ash and shadow, skies dark with smoke that blotted out the sun. But worst of all were the faces of the humans in these visions, twisted with hatred and avarice, using incredible technologies to cause unimaginable suffering. "So we withdrew," the keeper continued. "We took our knowledge and retreated to places like this, deep beneath the earth, where we could preserve what wisdom remained while your species learned through pain and trial. We hoped that one day, when humanity had grown beyond its destructive impulses, we could emerge again and share what we had protected." David's voice was hoarse when he spoke. "And now? Why are you showing this to us?" The keeper set the crystal tablet aside and turned to face them both directly. "Because time is running short, and we have been waiting for the right person to help us decide what comes next." "The right person?" Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air of the chamber. "What do you mean?" "You, Martha Henderson. Your bloodline carries markers that we placed in certain human family lines long ago. Genetic signatures that mark those who might be trusted with the choice that must be made." The weight of those words settled on Martha's shoulders like a physical burden. "What choice?" The keeper gestured to the vast chamber around them, to the glowing walls filled with accumulated knowledge, to the other beings moving through their eternal vigil. "Whether to remain hidden until your species destroys itself, or to reveal ourselves once more and risk everything on the chance that humanity has finally learned to choose wisdom over power." Martha's mind reeled. The financial troubles that had brought her to dig in her garden that morning seemed laughably small compared to the magnitude of what she was being told. Yet even as she struggled to process the cosmic implications of the keeper's words, a part of her couldn't help but think about the practical realities waiting above ground. Emma, sitting on their porch with her last piece of toast, the mortgage notice in her pocket, the dying farm that represented 3 generations of her family's hopes and dreams. "You said we have genetic markers. That means others in my family." "The genetic markers run in your family line for 7 generations, including Emma." David stepped protectively closer to Martha. "What exactly are you asking her to choose?" The keeper moved to another section of the chamber, gesturing for them to follow. Here, the walls showed different kinds of knowledge, not historical records or philosophical teachings, but practical information that made Martha's heart race with possibility. Agricultural techniques that could restore her dying farm to productivity beyond anything she'd dreamed. Medical knowledge that could cure diseases that plagued millions. Energy systems that could power entire cities without burning a single fossil fuel. "We offer our knowledge freely," the keeper said. "All of it. Every secret we have preserved. Every innovation we have perfected during our centuries of isolation. It could solve every crisis your world faces: hunger, disease, environmental destruction, the grinding poverty that has brought your family to desperation." Martha felt hope bloom in her chest like a flower in spring rain. "Then why is there a choice? Why wouldn't we want that?"
The keeper's alien features somehow manage to convey infinite sadness. Because with great knowledge comes great responsibility, and history has shown us that your species is not always worthy of that trust. If we emerge from hiding and share what we know, there is no guarantee that it will be used for good. The same technologies that could heal the Earth could also be weaponized to destroy it completely. The same knowledge that could eliminate poverty could be hoarded by the powerful to create even greater inequality. "But people are suffering now," Martha protested. "My daughter goes to bed hungry. Families everywhere are losing their homes, their farms, their futures. How can keeping knowledge hidden be the moral choice when sharing it could save so many lives?" David was studying the walls with the focused intensity he usually reserved for mechanical problems on the farm. There has to be a middle ground, a way to share some knowledge without revealing all of it. The first keeper shook its head. That path has been tried before in smaller ways. Knowledge, once released, cannot be controlled. It spreads, evolves, becomes perverted from its original purpose. There is no gradual revelation that does not eventually lead to complete exposure. Martha felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on her shoulders. The choice before her wasn't just about her family's financial troubles. It was about the future of humanity itself. Share the knowledge and risk another catastrophic war that could end civilization. Keep it hidden and allow the slow-motion disasters of climate change, poverty, and disease to continue their devastating work. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "The cosmic alignments that allow for the safe emergence of our people occur only once every few centuries. The next such alignment begins in 3 days and lasts for exactly 1 lunar cycle. If we miss this opportunity, it will be nearly 400 years before another chance arises." "3 days?" Martha repeated numbly. "You're asking me to make a decision that affects the entire world, and I have 3 days to think about it?" "The urgency is regrettable," the keeper acknowledged, "but the choice cannot be delayed. Either we begin the process of emergence during the alignment period, or we retreat deeper into hiding and wait for your species to evolve further, if it survives that long." David had been quiet for several minutes, studying the information displayed on the walls with increasing intensity. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of barely controlled anger. "This is insane! You can't put this kind of responsibility on one person. Martha's a farmer's wife from rural Kansas, not some world leader or philosopher. She doesn't have the right to make decisions for all of humanity." The keeper's alien features somehow managed to convey infinite sympathy. "And yet, David Henderson, who else would you trust with such a choice? Your world leaders, who wage wars over resources that could be made abundant? Your corporations, who prioritize profit over human welfare? Your scientists, who split the atom and then debated whether to use it as a weapon?"
"But why Martha specifically?" David pressed. "You said there are others with these genetic markers. Why not give them the choice too?" "There are others," the keeper confirmed, "but they are scattered across your world, and most lack the combination of desperation and moral grounding that makes Martha suitable for this decision. She knows suffering intimately enough to understand what is at stake, yet her choices have consistently prioritized others' welfare over her own gain." Martha thought about the countless small decisions she'd made over the past year, stretching food to make sure Emma had enough, working extra hours to help neighbors even when her own family was struggling, choosing to tend her dying garden rather than give up hope entirely. Were those really the qualities that made someone qualified to decide the fate of the world? "Show me more," she said suddenly. "If I'm supposed to make this choice, I need to understand everything.
Show me exactly what knowledge you're offering. Show me the risks. Show me what happened the last time you tried to help humanity." The keeper nodded, as if this request had been expected. "Very well. But be warned, the full knowledge is overwhelming. Many humans who have attempted to absorb even a fraction of what we preserve have been driven mad by the scope of it." "I have to try," Martha said firmly. "I won't make a decision this important based on incomplete information." What followed was the most intense experience of Martha's life. The keepers led her and David to a section of the chamber where the walls seemed to pulse with particularly intense light. When Martha approached and placed her hands on the glowing surface, knowledge flowed into her mind like water rushing through a broken dam. She saw the history of human-keeper interaction stretching back thousands of years. The golden ages when cooperation led to incredible advances in art, science, and human welfare. The gradual corruption as human nature's darker impulses took hold. The wars fought with technologies that could reshape landscapes and eliminate entire populations. The final, devastating conflict that convinced the keepers to withdraw permanently from the surface world. But she also saw the potential futures that could unfold from each choice. In timelines where the knowledge remained hidden, she watched human civilization struggle and often fail to address the mounting crises of climate change, resource depletion, and social inequality. Millions died from preventable diseases, wars were fought over dwindling resources, and technological advancement proceeded at a pace too slow to prevent catastrophic environmental collapse. Yet, in timelines where the knowledge was revealed, the outcomes were even more volatile. Some possibilities showed incredible golden ages where human and keeper wisdom combined to create paradise on Earth. But others showed even more devastating wars, fought with weapons that made nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. Entire continents reduced to uninhabitable wastelands. The extinction not just of humanity, but of most life on Earth. The visions came faster and faster, showing Martha possibilities that branched and split like an infinite tree of consequences. She saw her own daughter growing up in a world of abundance and peace, but also growing up in a world of ash and radiation. She saw technology that could restore their dying farm to impossible productivity, but also technology that could turn that same farm into a weapon capable of destroying nations. When the flow of information finally stopped, Martha collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the scope of what she'd witnessed. David caught her as she fell, his face pale with concern. "Martha, are you all right?" She looked up at him, and he flinched at the expression in her eyes. In the span of minutes, she'd aged years. The weight of infinite possibility and infinite responsibility had etched itself into her features, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that hadn't been there before. "I understand now. I understand why this choice exists and why it's so terrible." The keeper who had first spoken to them approached cautiously. "What have you decided, Martha Henderson?" Martha struggled to her feet, David's supporting arm the only thing keeping her upright. The weight of infinite possibility and infinite responsibility swirled through her mind like a storm, showing her consequences upon consequences, stretching out into an infinite future. Every choice led to both salvation and damnation, to heights of glory and depths of despair. "I need time to think," she said. 3 days, you said. I need every hour of those 3 days." "Time you shall have," the keeper replied. "But know that the weight of this decision will only grow heavier with contemplation. Some choices are too large for any single mind to hold." As they made their way back through the tunnel toward the surface, Martha felt as if she were carrying the world on her shoulders.
The treasures that had seemed so important that morning, the golden urns and precious artifacts that could have solved her family's financial problems, now seemed trivial compared to the cosmic responsibility that had been placed in her hands. When they finally emerged into the daylight, Emma was still sitting on the porch, but now she was crying. The sight of her daughter's tears cut through Martha's overwhelming thoughts like a knife. "Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong?" "The man came again," Emma said between sobs. "The one with the papers. He said we have to leave. He said the bank owns our house now." Martha's blood turned to ice. While she'd been underground contemplating the fate of humanity, the foreclosure notice she'd forgotten in her pocket had become reality. The sheriff's deputy had served the final papers. They had 30 days to vacate the property that had been in David's family for 3 generations. As she knelt to comfort her crying daughter, Martha felt the full weight of her impossible situation. In 3 days, she would have to choose whether to risk the future of human civilization for the chance to save it. But before that choice even mattered, she might lose the only home her family had ever known. The contrast was almost laughably absurd. She held the power to reshape the world, but she couldn't even save her own farm. Martha spent the first night after the revelation sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure papers while her family slept. The official documents seemed to mock her with their cold, bureaucratic language. Failure to remit payment, breach of contract, immediate vacation required. 30 days to abandon everything her family had built, everything they'd worked for across 3 generations. Yet downstairs, beneath the very foundation of this house they were about to lose, lay knowledge that could transform the world. The irony was so bitter it made her physically sick. She'd told David everything when they'd finally gotten Emma to sleep, whispering the impossible truth in their darkened bedroom. He'd listened in stunned silence as she described the visions, the vast scope of potential futures, the weight of responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. When she'd finished, he'd simply held her while she cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming magnitude of what she'd been asked to decide. "We could take some of those artifacts," he'd whispered finally. "Just a few pieces, enough to pay off the mortgage and buy us time to figure this out." Martha had considered it. The golden urns alone would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to the right collector. A single piece of that otherworldly jewelry could fund Emma's entire education. But something in the keeper's words had made her hesitate. This wasn't just about treasure. It was about trust. Taking artifacts for personal gain while holding the power to change the world felt like a fundamental violation of the faith they'd placed in her. Now, as dawn broke over their dying fields, Martha found herself no closer to a decision. She made coffee with their last grounds and watched the sunrise over land that would soon belong to someone else. In 48 hours, she would have to give the keepers her answer. But first, she needed to understand something that had been nagging at her since the revelation. "I'm going back down there," she told David over breakfast. He nearly choked on his coffee. "Martha, no! You saw what that knowledge did to you yesterday. You barely slept. You've been staring into space for hours. Whatever you're thinking of doing—" "I need to ask them something," she interrupted. "Something that doesn't make sense." An hour later, Martha stood once again at the entrance to the tunnel. This time, she descended alone, despite David's protests. The stone steps felt familiar now, and the cool air rising from below carried a sense of expectation, as if the keepers had been waiting for her return. The chamber was just as magnificent as she remembered, but now Martha approached it with different eyes. The knowledge she'd absorbed yesterday had given her a new perspective on what she was seeing. This wasn't just a repository of information. It was a monument to failure. Every artifact, every glowing wall, every carefully preserved text represented something that humanity had once possessed and then lost through its own destructive impulses. The same keeper who had first spoken to her materialized from the depths of the chamber, moving with that liquid grace that seemed to defy physics. "You have returned sooner than expected, Martha Henderson. Have you reached a decision?" "I have a question," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Yesterday, you showed me the history of your interactions with humanity. You showed me how we turned your gifts into weapons, how we used your knowledge to wage wars that nearly destroyed the world. This is true. But you also showed me potential futures where revealing your knowledge leads to the same kinds of disasters. If humanity hasn't changed, if we're still the same species that disappointed you before, then why is this choice even being offered? Why not just stay hidden?" The keeper was silent for a long moment, and I sensed movement in the deeper parts of the chamber as other beings gathered to listen to this conversation. "You ask the right question, Martha Henderson, the question that has divided our people for centuries." "Divided?" "We are not unanimous in this decision, Martha Henderson. Some among us believe that humanity's nature is fundamentally unchanged, that revealing ourselves would only repeat the tragedies of the past. Others believe that your species has evolved, that the pain and suffering of the centuries since our withdrawal have taught you wisdom that you lacked before." Another keeper approached, this one smaller and somehow more ancient than the first. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of eons. "I was present during the last great collaboration," it said. "I watched your ancestors take gifts of healing and twist them into plagues. I saw technologies of creation become weapons of annihilation. I carry the memory of cities burning with fires that should have brought warmth and light to millions." "Then why," I asked, "would you ever consider trusting us again?" The ancient keeper moved closer, and I saw something in its alien features that reminded me of my own grandmother, a kind of tired wisdom born from too much experience with disappointment. "Because isolation has taught us something as well," it said. "We have preserved knowledge perfectly, maintained it in pristine form for centuries, but knowledge without application becomes sterile. Wisdom without challenge becomes dogma. We have kept your species' heritage safe, but we have also kept it lifeless." The first keeper gestured to the glowing walls around them. "Every innovation here, every breakthrough, every leap of understanding, it all came from the interaction between our knowledge and human creativity. Your species possesses something we lack, the capacity for inspired chaos, for leaping beyond logic into new possibilities. You're saying you need us as much as we need you?"
"We are saying," the ancient keeper replied, "that preservation without progress is merely another form of death. We have been the guardians of humanity's past achievements, but we cannot create its future. Only you can do that." Martha felt a shift in her understanding, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. "This isn't really about whether humanity deserves your knowledge, it's about whether you can bear to remain isolated forever." "The choice is genuinely yours," the first keeper assured her. "We will honor whatever decision you make. But yes, we too face a kind of extinction if we remain hidden. Not physical death, but something perhaps worse. The slow death of purpose, of meaning, of growth." As Martha absorbed this revelation, she became aware of more keepers emerging from the deeper parts of the chamber. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, all moving with that same liquid grace, but carrying themselves with different demeanors. Some seemed eager, their alien features somehow conveying hope and anticipation. Others appeared more guarded, their postures suggesting skepticism or fear. "How many of you are there?" she asked. In this repository, nearly 3,000. Worldwide, in all our hidden settlements, perhaps 50,000. We are not a numerous people, Martha Henderson. Every choice we make carries the weight of our entire civilization's survival. 50,000 beings, hidden beneath the earth, waiting for one human woman to decide their fate. The number was staggering, but somehow it made the choice feel more real, more personal. These weren't abstract cosmic forces, they were individuals with hopes and fears, just like her own family. "I need to see more," Martha said suddenly. "I need to understand what your emergence would actually look like. Not just the knowledge you'd share, but how it would happen, what the process would be." The keepers exchanged what might have been glances, communicating in ways Martha couldn't perceive. Finally, the first one nodded. "Very well. But understand that what we show you will make your choice more difficult, not easier. The process of emergence is not simple, and its consequences cannot be predicted with certainty." What followed was another overwhelming download of information, but this time Martha was better prepared for the intensity. The visions showed her a carefully orchestrated plan that had been developed over centuries of debate and preparation. Only after humanity had proven it could handle these gifts responsibly would the keepers reveal themselves directly. The process could take decades, maybe centuries, with each phase carefully monitored to ensure that the knowledge wasn't being misused. But Martha also saw the risks inherent in this gradual approach. Human nature hadn't changed completely. There would still be those who would try to weaponize even beneficial technologies. The same clean energy systems that could power cities could potentially be turned into devastating weapons. The medical knowledge that could cure cancer could also be used to create targeted biological weapons. Most troubling of all, Martha saw that the emergence process, once begun, couldn't be stopped. If humanity proved unworthy of the trust placed in it, the keepers couldn't simply disappear again. The knowledge would be out there, spreading and evolving beyond anyone's control. When the visions ended, Martha found herself sitting on one of the ancient stone benches, her head in her hands. The weight of the decision seemed to grow heavier with every new piece of information she received. "There's something else," she said without looking up. "Something I keep thinking about but haven't asked directly." "Speak your question."
My family is about to lose our farm. My daughter goes to bed hungry. We're facing homelessness in a month. If I choose to have you remain hidden, what happens to us? Do you just let us lose everything while sitting on knowledge that could save not just us, but millions of others? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Martha could sense the discomfort it caused among the assembled keepers, but she pressed on. "And if I choose to reveal your existence, partly because I want to save my own family, how is that different from the selfish motivations that led to disasters in the past? How do I know I'm making this choice for the right reasons?" You ask this question because you are worthy to make this choice, Martha Henderson. A person motivated purely by selfishness would not torment themselves with such doubts. "But the doubt is legitimate," Martha insisted. "I'm desperate. Desperate people make poor decisions. How can you trust me to weigh the fate of the world against my daughter's welfare?" "Because," the first keeper said, quietly, "that is exactly the kind of choice that defines moral character. Anyone can make good decisions when they have nothing to lose. True ethical choice emerges only under pressure, when the stakes are personal and immediate." "We have watched you for years, Martha Henderson.
We saw you give your last food to hungry neighbors during the worst of the drought. We saw you work extra shifts to help pay for medical care for a friend's sick child. We saw you choose community welfare over personal gain time and again, even when your own family suffered for it. The question wasn't whether humanity deserved this knowledge, or whether it was ready for it. The question was whether love and hope were stronger than fear and caution, whether the chance to save millions of lives was worth the risk of enabling those who might destroy them. And as she thought about Emma sitting on their porch, facing an uncertain future with the resilient optimism that only children possessed, Martha began to see the shape of her decision emerging from the chaos of infinite possibility. Martha woke on the final day with a clarity that surprised her. The past 48 hours had been a blur of sleepless contemplation, whispered conversations with David, and careful observation of Emma as their daughter played in the dying garden, unaware that her mother held the future of the world in her hands. But as dawn broke over the Henderson farm for what might be the last time under their ownership, Martha knew what she had to do. She found David in the barn, mechanically cleaning tools that might soon belong to someone else. His movements were automatic, born from decades of routine, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched whenever he thought she wasn't looking. The weight of their impending homelessness sat heavy between them, made all the more surreal by the cosmic choice that overshadowed their personal crisis. "I've decided," she said simply. David's hands stilled on the wrench he'd been polishing. "And? I'm going to tell them yes." He turned to face her fully, and she saw relief war with terror in his expression. "Are you certain? Once you make this choice—" "There's no going back," Martha finished. "I know. But David, I keep thinking about Emma, about the world we're leaving her. Climate change, poverty, diseases that could be cured but aren't because the knowledge doesn't exist or isn't shared. How can I choose to keep solutions hidden when children are dying from problems that could be solved?" David set down his tools and crossed the barn to take her hands in his. "What about the risks? What about the chance that this knowledge could be misused?" Martha had wrestled with this question for 2 straight days, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle with pieces that never quite fit together. "There's risk in both choices," she said finally. "Risk in revealing the knowledge and risk in keeping it hidden. But one kind of risk is active. It's choosing to trust humanity to grow and learn. The other is passive. It's choosing to let suffering continue because we're afraid of what might happen if we try to stop it." She pulled her hands free and walked to the barn door, looking out over their drought-stricken fields toward the house where Emma was probably just waking up. "I've been thinking about something the keepers said. They told me that true ethical choice only emerges under pressure. Well, our entire species is under pressure right now. Climate change, inequality, the threat of wars over dwindling resources. Maybe this is exactly when we need to make the choice to trust each other." David joined her at the doorway, and together they watched Emma emerge from the house, still in her pajamas, to check on the small section of garden where a few hardy plants still clung to life despite the drought. "She's going to inherit whatever world we leave her," Martha continued. "And I'd rather leave her a world where we took the chance on hope than one where we chose fear." An hour later, Martha stood once again at the entrance to the tunnel. This time, Emma was with them. Martha had tried to leave her daughter with neighbors, but Emma had sensed the importance of whatever was happening and refused to be left behind. In the end, Martha had decided that whatever her daughter was about to witness, it was part of her heritage too. The genetic markers the keepers had spoken of meant that Emma might one day face choices of her own about humanity's relationship with these hidden guardians. "It's like a fairy tale," Emma whispered as they descended the stone steps, her eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. Children, Martha reflected, adapted to impossibility so much more easily than adults. The chamber was filled with keepers when they arrived, more than Martha had seen before. Word of her decision had apparently spread, and they had gathered to witness this moment that would reshape their civilization as much as humanity's. The glowing walls seemed brighter than usual, pulsing with anticipation. The ancient keeper who had spoken to Martha before stepped forward, its alien features somehow conveying both hope and apprehension. "Have you reached your decision, Martha Henderson?" "I have." Martha's voice carried clearly through the vast space, stronger and more certain than she had felt in months. "I choose emergence. I choose to trust humanity with your knowledge." A ripple seemed to pass through the assembled keepers, not sound, but something deeper, as if the very air in the chamber had shifted. Some of the beings stepped closer, their postures conveying joy or relief. Others remained in the shadows, their reservations still evident. "You understand the irreversible nature of this choice?" the first keeper asked. "I do. And I understand the risks, but I also understand that hiding knowledge while people suffer is itself a choice with moral consequences. I choose to trust in humanity's capacity to grow, to learn, to become better than we've been in the past." Emma tugged on Martha's sleeve. "Mama, what's happening?" Martha knelt down to her daughter's level, looking into eyes that would see changes beyond anything previous generations could have imagined. "We're making a choice that's going to change the world, sweetheart. It's going to be scary sometimes, but it's also going to be wonderful." The ancient keeper approached, carrying what looked like a crystalline device, similar to the tablets Martha had seen before, but larger and more complex. "The process of emergence will begin with you, Martha Henderson. As the one who made the choice, you will be the first human to receive direct knowledge transfer. You will become our initial ambassador to your species." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," the first keeper explained, "that you will carry within your mind the foundational knowledge necessary to guide the emergence process. You will understand our technology, our history, our methods of peaceful coexistence. You will become the bridge between our peoples." Martha felt a moment of vertigo as the implications hit her. "You're asking me to leave my old life behind?" "Not leave," the ancient keeper corrected. "Transform. You will still be Martha Henderson, wife and mother and farmer, but you will also be something more, a guardian of the transition, a keeper of the balance between revelation and restraint." David stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "What about Emma? What about our family?" "Your family will be protected," the keeper assured him. "The knowledge Martha receives will include the ability to restore your farmland, to ensure your financial security, to provide for Emma's future in ways you cannot currently imagine. But more than that, you will become part of something unprecedented in human history, the first family to openly bridge the gap between our species." The crystalline device in the ancient keeper's hands began to glow more brightly, and Martha could feel energy radiating from it like warmth from a fire.
Whatever knowledge it contained, it was vast and complex beyond anything she'd experienced in her previous visions. "Are you ready, Martha Henderson?" Martha looked around the chamber one last time, at the assembled keepers who had waited centuries for this moment, at her husband, whose face showed trust despite his fears, at her daughter, whose future hung in the balance of this decision. Then she thought about all the other families facing the same struggles they'd faced, the crushing weight of financial desperation, the heartbreak of watching dreams die from lack of opportunity, the fear that came from feeling powerless in the face of enormous global challenges. "I'm ready." The knowledge transfer was unlike anything Martha had ever experienced before. Instead of the overwhelming flood of information she'd encountered previously, this felt controlled, purposeful. The knowledge flowed into her mind in organized streams, technological understanding that would allow her to begin the restoration of their farm, diplomatic protocols for eventual contact with world leaders, historical context that would help her guide humanity's integration with keeper society. But most importantly, she received something she hadn't expected: hope. Not just the abstract hope that things might get better, but specific, detailed knowledge of how they would get better. She saw the step-by-step process by which hunger would be eliminated, how clean energy would replace fossil fuels, how diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia would become things of the past.
It would take time, decades, perhaps centuries, but the path was clear and achievable. More than that, it was inevitable once the process began. The knowledge was too beneficial, too obviously superior to existing methods for it to be ignored or suppressed indefinitely. When the transfer was complete, Martha found herself changed in ways both subtle and profound. She was still herself, still a woman who worried about her daughter's future and felt overwhelmed by responsibilities too large for any one person to bear. But now, she also carried within herself the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had spent centuries learning from its mistakes. "How you feel?" David asked, studying her face with concern. Martha considered the question carefully. She felt expanded, as if her mind had been a small room that had suddenly opened into a vast mansion. The knowledge was there, organized and accessible, but it didn't feel foreign or overwhelming. Instead, it felt like remembering things she'd always known but had forgotten. "Different," she said finally, "but still me." Emma had been unusually quiet during the entire process, watching with the focused attention that children brought to truly important moments. Now she stepped closer to Martha and took her hand. "Mama, your eyes look different. They're the same color, but they look deeper." Martha knelt down and hugged her daughter tightly. "A lot of things are going to change, Emma. Good changes, but big ones. Are you ready for an adventure?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Will we still live on the farm?" "We will, but it's going to become a very special farm. The first place where new kinds of plants grow, where new kinds of energy systems are tested, where people come to learn about possibilities they never imagined." The ancient keeper approached them one final time. "The emergence process begins now, Martha Henderson. Within days, you will start to implement the agricultural restoration techniques you now understand. Within weeks, your farm will become a demonstration site that will attract the attention from scientists and government officials. Within months, you will be ready to make formal contact with your world's leaders." "And you?" Martha asked. "When will you emerge from hiding? When you judge that humanity is ready
to accept us," the keeper replied. "That decision now rests with you. You have become our voice in your world, just as you were our conscience in making this choice." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Martha turned back one last time to look at the glowing walls filled with accumulated knowledge. Soon, that knowledge would begin to flow into the world above, carried first by her, but eventually spreading to scientists, doctors, engineers, and teachers across the globe. The weight of responsibility was still enormous, but it felt different now. Instead of crushing her with its impossibility, it energized her with its potential. She was no longer just Martha Henderson, farmer's wife. She was Martha Henderson, bridge between worlds, guardian of humanity's greatest transformation. The climb back to the surface felt symbolic, leaving behind the hidden depths of secret knowledge to bring light into a world that desperately needed it. When they emerged into the afternoon sunlight, Martha immediately noticed something that made her heart leap with joy. The plants in Emma's small garden section, the ones that had been barely surviving despite all her care, were already showing signs of new growth. Not dramatic changes, but subtle improvements that spoke of soil beginning to heal, of plants finding new reserves of strength. "Look, Mama," Emma called out, running to the garden. "The tomatoes have new flowers."
Martha smiled, feeling the knowledge she now carried suggests dozens of ways to accelerate and enhance this natural recovery. Their farm would indeed become something special, a place where dying land learned to live again, where impossible abundance grew from what had seemed like hopeless poverty. David joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "No going back now," he said softly. "No going back," Martha agreed. But as she watched their daughter excitedly examine every new leaf and bud in the recovering garden, she felt only anticipation for the journey ahead. They had chosen hope over fear, trust over suspicion, possibility over resignation. The foreclosure notice in her pocket would soon become irrelevant, not because of any treasures taken from the keeper chamber, but because their farm was about to become far too valuable for any bank to seize. Within months, it would be a site of international interest, a place where the future of agriculture was being redefined. But more than that, it would remain a home. A place where a family had faced impossible choices and found the courage to choose love over fear, where ancient wisdom and human hope had finally learned to work together, where the seeds of a better world had first been planted in soil that everyone else had given up for dead. As the sun set over fields that would soon bloom with impossible abundance, Martha Henderson stood at the threshold of humanity's greatest adventure, ready to guide her species into a future that no one could have imagined just 3 days before. 5 years later, Dr. Martha Henderson stood at the edge of what had once been her dying vegetable garden, watching as delegates from 47 nations marveled at crops that shouldn't have been possible. The tomato plants towered 12 feet high, their branches heavy with fruit that glowed with an inner vitality that conventional agriculture had never achieved. The soil beneath her feet, once cracked and lifeless, now teemed with microorganisms that had been thought extinct for centuries, brought back through techniques that the scientific community was still struggling to understand. "The yield per acre is unprecedented," Dr. Rodriguez from the International Agricultural Council was saying to his assistant, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and bewilderment. 30 times the productivity of traditional farming methods with zero environmental impact. The soil is actually improving with each harvest cycle. Martha smiled, remembering the woman she'd been 5 years ago, desperate, overwhelmed, kneeling in dust and praying for anything that might grow. That woman could never have imagined standing here now, recognized as one of the world's leading experts in sustainable agriculture, her techniques being implemented on every continent. The transformation hadn't been easy, Those first months after her choice had been a delicate balance of revelation and restraint. She'd started small, implementing agricultural improvements that seemed innovative but not impossible to the outside world. Crop rotation methods that seemed ingenious. Soil treatment techniques that appeared to be breakthrough chemistry rather than keeper biotechnology. Water conservation systems that looked like clever engineering rather than devices that could literally call moisture from the air. "Dr. Henderson," a familiar voice called from across the demonstration field. Martha turned to see Dr. Sarah Chen approaching, the lead scientist from the team that had been studying the Henderson farm for the past 3 years. Behind her walked a group Martha recognized as potential new additions to the inner circle, researchers and policymakers who had proven themselves ready for greater truths. "The soil samples from Plot 7 are showing the microbial diversity we discussed," Dr. Chen said, her voice carefully neutral for the benefit of the newcomers. "I think we're ready to move to the next phase of testing." Martha nodded, understanding the coded language. Plot 7 was where they'd begun implementing the more advanced keeper techniques, methods that couldn't be easily explained by conventional science. The fact that Dr. Chen was suggesting they move to the next phase meant these new researchers had proven themselves trustworthy enough to begin learning about the true source of these innovations.
The integration process was working exactly as the keepers had planned. Knowledge was spreading gradually, carefully, through networks of scientists and leaders who had been slowly introduced to increasingly advanced concepts. Each person who joined the inner circle was thoroughly vetted, their commitment to peaceful application of knowledge tested through smaller revelations before they learned the full truth. "Mom?" Emma's voice carried across the field, and Martha turned to see her daughter running toward them. At 13, Emma had grown into a young woman who moved between two worlds with the easy confidence of someone who had never known anything else. She spoke casually with Nobel Prize winners and alien beings with equal comfort, translating between human curiosity and keeper wisdom as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The delegation from the keepers is here," Emma said quietly when she reached Martha's side. "They're waiting in the chamber." Martha excused herself from the international delegates and made her way toward the house. The entrance to the chamber was no longer hidden. 5 years of construction had created a proper research facility built around the original tunnel, complete with laboratories, conference rooms, and living quarters for the extended team of humans and keepers who now worked together on the Emergence project. The main chamber had been transformed as well. What had once been a repository of hidden knowledge was now a bustling center of collaboration. Human scientists worked alongside keeper scholars, their different perspectives creating innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. The glowing walls still held their ancient wisdom, but now they were supplemented by holographic displays showing real-time data from implementation sites around the world. 3 keepers waited for her in the central conference area, the ancient being who would become her closest advisor, along with 2 younger ones who specialized in ecological restoration and social integration. As Martha approached, she felt the familiar warmth of their mental connection, a form of communication that allowed for the exchange of complex ideas far more efficiently than words alone. "The delegation from the keepers has agreed to the full revelation," the ancient keeper communicated. "Their government is prepared to announce the partnership publicly within the month." Martha felt a familiar flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. Australia would be the 3rd nation to openly acknowledge the existence of the keepers and their collaboration with humanity. New Zealand had been first, followed by Costa Rica. Each public revelation brought them closer to the moment when the partnership would become common knowledge rather than carefully guarded secret. "Are we certain they're ready? The social disruption analysis?" "Favorable," one of the younger keepers responded.
Their population shows high acceptance rates for environmental restoration projects, and their media coverage of the previous revelations has been largely positive. The risk factors fall within acceptable parameters. Martha nodded, though part of her still marveled at the fact that she was participating in conversations about the managed revelation of alien contact to human civilization. The scared farmer's wife who had made the initial choice 5 years ago could never have imagined becoming a coordinator of first contact protocols. "There's something else," the ancient keeper continued, and Martha sensed a note of excitement in the mental communication. "The deep space monitoring stations have detected response signals." Martha's breath caught. For months, the keepers had been broadcasting subtle signals into space, announcing their emergence from hiding and their renewed partnership with humanity. The responses they'd been hoping for, contact from other keeper settlements on distant worlds, had finally begun to arrive. "How many?" she asked. 17 confirmed responses so far, with more expected as the signals reach farther systems. Martha Henderson, your choice 5 years ago, has begun a renaissance that extends far beyond this single world.
The weight of that revelation settled on Martha's shoulders with familiar complexity. Her decision to trust humanity with keeper knowledge hadn't just changed life on Earth. It had reconnected a galactic network of civilizations that had been dormant for centuries. The implications were staggering. "When will they arrive?" she asked. "The nearest is approximately 18 months away," the young keeper replied. "Others will take decades or centuries to reach this system. But Martha, they are coming. Your world is about to become the center of a renewed alliance of peaceful species." Martha excused herself from the meeting and walked back toward the surface, needing time to process this latest development. The research facility was buzzing with activity as always, human and keeper researchers collaborating on projects that ranged from medical breakthroughs to environmental restoration, to energy systems that could power entire cities without environmental impact. In the agricultural labs, she found David working with a team of engineers on refinements to the water reclamation systems. At 57, he'd grown into his role as the facility's director of practical implementation, with the same steady competence he'd once brought to farming. The man who had once struggled to make ends meet on their failing farm now oversaw projects that were transforming agriculture on 6 continents. "How did the delegation meeting go?" he asked, looking up from the holographic display he'd been studying. "Australia's going public next month. And David, we've made contact with other keeper settlements, off-world settlements." David set down the tool he'd been holding and stared at her. Even after 5 years of impossible revelations, this one clearly caught him off guard. "How many?" 17 so far. The nearest will be here in 18 months. David was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications. "Emma's going to be so excited," he said finally. "She's been asking when she'd get to meet keepers from other worlds." Their daughter had adapted to their extraordinary circumstances with the resilience that seemed to be her defining characteristic. She attended a regular high school in town 3 days a week, maintaining friendships with kids who had no idea that her family was at the center of humanity's greatest transformation. The other 4 days, she studied with keeper tutors, learning mathematics and science that wouldn't be taught in human universities for decades. "Speaking of Emma," Martha said, "she mentioned earlier that she's been having dreams again." David's expression grew more serious. Over the past year, Emma had begun experiencing vivid dreams that seemed to contain knowledge she shouldn't have possessed. The keepers believed this was a sign that her inherited genetic markers were activating, preparing her for an even greater role in the human-keeper partnership than her parents had played. "What kind of dreams?" She described seeing cities that float in the clouds of gas-giant planets, architecture made from crystallized music, gardens that grow in the vacuum of space. Martha shook her head. "She's seeing things from the other keeper settlements, David.
Somehow, she's already connecting with civilizations that are still months or years away from arriving here. That evening, the Henderson family sat on their front porch, just as they had 5 years earlier, but everything else had changed beyond recognition. The house had been expanded and modernized, though they'd been careful to preserve its essential character. The fields stretched green and abundant to the horizon, supporting not just impossible crops, but also the infrastructure of humanity's most important research facility. Emma sat cross-legged on the porch swing, a tablet in her lap, displaying homework that mixed conventional subjects with advanced studies in interspecies communication theory. Her casual integration of normal teenage concerns with cosmic responsibilities never ceased to amaze Martha.
"Mrs. Patterson asked me today if we're really aliens," Emma said, without looking up from her work. "I told her we're definitely human, but that we work with people who aren't. She seemed satisfied with that answer." Martha smiled. Emma had developed a gift for explaining their situation in ways that were technically truthful while avoiding details that might overwhelm people who weren't ready for the full truth. It was a skill that would serve her well in the years to come. "Are you okay with all this?" Martha asked, a question she found herself returning to regularly. "With the way your life has turned out? Most kids don't have to worry about interplanetary diplomacy." Emma looked up from her tablet, and Martha saw in her daughter's eyes the same depth that she'd noticed years earlier. Wisdom beyond her years, but now tempered with confidence and purpose rather than worried observation. "Mom, most kids' parents don't get to help save the world. Most kids don't get to learn about civilizations among the stars or help design systems that could end hunger or work with beings who've been around since before recorded history. I wouldn't trade this life for anything." As if summoned by their conversation, one of the keepers emerged from the research facility and approached the house. It was one of the younger ones Martha had spoken with earlier, and its graceful movement across the lawn still filled her with wonder even after years of daily interaction. "Martha Henderson, we have received authorization from the council to share something with your family, something that relates directly to Emma's recent experiences." The three humans followed the keeper down into the chamber where a new section had been illuminated. Walls covered in star charts and technical specifications that seemed to pulse with anticipation. "These are the locations of the keeper settlements that have responded to our emergence signals," the keeper explained. "But more than that, they are destinations. Ships are being prepared, Martha Henderson. Ships that could carry human representatives to these other worlds, to learn from civilizations that have developed along different paths, that have discovered knowledge even we on Earth have never possessed." Emma stepped closer to the star charts, her eyes wide with excitement and recognition. "I've been there, in my dreams. That one and that one." She pointed to two different star systems. "They have cities that sing and libraries made of living crystal." "The genetic markers in your bloodline are stronger than we initially realized. Emma Henderson, you have the potential to become our first human interstellar ambassador. If you choose to accept that role, you could journey to these distant worlds and help establish connections that would benefit all of our species." Martha felt her heart clench with the familiar mixture of pride and terror that came with watching her child face extraordinary choices. "How old would she need to be?" she asked. "The first ship could be ready within 3 years. Emma would be 16, old enough to make the choice for herself, young enough to adapt fully to life among different civilizations." Emma turned to her parents, her face shining with excitement and determination. "I want to do it. Mom, Dad, this is what I'm meant for. I can feel it. Martha looked at David and saw her own complex emotions reflected in his expression. Their daughter, who once worried about having enough to eat, was now being offered the chance to travel to alien worlds as humanity's representative. The transformation of their lives over the past 5 years seemed almost modest compared to what lay ahead. "It's your choice, sweetheart," Martha said finally. "But you have time to think about it. This isn't a decision you need to make tonight." As they walked back toward the house under a sky filled with more stars than Martha had ever noticed before, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The choice she'd made 5 years ago in desperation and hope had led to consequences beyond anything she could have imagined. Their farm, once on the verge of foreclosure, was now the center of humanity's greatest adventure. Their daughter, once facing an uncertain future limited by poverty and circumstances, now had opportunities that spanned the galaxy. And humanity itself, once isolated and struggling with seemingly insurmountable challenges, was on the verge of joining a galactic community of peaceful civilizations. The mortgage notice that had once kept Martha awake at night was now framed in David's workshop, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how quickly the impossible could become reality when courage overcame fear. "No regrets?" David asked quietly as they reached the porch. Martha looked back toward the research facility, where lights glowed in windows occupied by humans and keepers working together to build a better future. She thought about the delegates from around the world who came to study techniques that were eliminating hunger and healing damaged ecosystems. She considered the children in schools across the globe who are learning about cooperation and hope instead of competition and scarcity. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Only gratitude." As they settled in for the evening, Martha's phone buzzed with a message from the International Coordination Center. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: a medical breakthrough that needed careful introduction, an energy system ready for implementation in drought-stricken regions, and a diplomatic protocol for the upcoming Australian revelation. But tonight, she was simply a mother sitting on her porch with her family, watching the stars and knowing that among them were friends they had yet to meet, worlds they had yet to explore, and possibilities that exceeded anything their ancestors could have dreamed. The choice she'd made in desperation 5 years ago had grown into something beautiful beyond measure, a testament to the power of hope over fear, trust over suspicion, and love over the many forces that sought to divide rather than unite. Emma fell asleep against her father's shoulder as they sat on the porch swing, and Martha covered her daughter with a blanket while David carried her inside. Tomorrow, their extraordinary daughter would continue preparing for an extraordinary future. But tonight, she was simply a teenager who had stayed up too late talking about dreams that were destined to become reality. As Martha turned off the lights and headed toward bed, she paused at the window that looked out over their transformed fields. In the distance, she could see the soft glow from the chamber where keepers and humans continued their collaborative work through the night, weaving together knowledge and wisdom that would benefit generations yet to come. But her peaceful moment was interrupted by an urgent chiming from her communication device. The keeper enhanced technology that allowed for instantaneous contact with research centers around the world. Martha's heart rate quickened as she recognized the emergency tone. Such alerts were reserved for the most critical developments in the emergence process. "Martha Henderson," came the familiar crystalline voice of the ancient keeper, though this time it carried an urgency she'd never heard before. "We require your immediate presence in the chamber. Something unprecedented has occurred." Martha quickly changed back into her clothes and made her way down to the research facility, her mind racing through possibilities. Has one of the international revelations gone wrong? Was there some kind of crisis with the off-world contact signals? As she descended into the chamber, she found it filled with more keepers than she'd ever seen in one place. Not just the dozen or so who regularly worked at the facility, but dozens of others who must have traveled from hidden settlements around the world. The ancient keeper approached her, and Martha immediately sensed the mixture of excitement and apprehension radiating from its alien consciousness. The response signals we've been receiving, they were not what we initially believed them to be. What do you mean? Martha asked, though a chill was already running down her spine. Another keeper, one she didn't recognize, stepped forward carrying a crystalline tablet that pulsed with patterns of light she'd never seen before. We believed we were receiving acknowledgments from distant keeper settlements. But the linguistic analysis has revealed something far more significant. These signals are not from our people, Martha Henderson. They are from other species entirely, civilizations we have never encountered before. Martha felt the ground shift beneath her feet, metaphorically speaking. Other species? You mean there are more intelligent races out there than just humans and keepers? Many more, the ancient keeper confirmed. The signals we've decoded suggest the existence of a vast galactic community. Dozens of different civilizations, all connected through some form of interstellar communication network. Your decision to emerge from hiding has announced Earth's presence to this larger community, and they are responding. The implications hit Martha like a physical blow. She'd thought her choice would reconnect the scattered keeper settlements and help humanity solve its problems through advanced knowledge. She'd never imagined it would announce Earth's presence to an entire galaxy of alien civilizations. Are they friendly? She managed to ask. Unknown, the unfamiliar keeper replied. The signals contain what appear to be formal diplomatic protocols, suggesting peaceful intent. But Martha Henderson, some of these civilizations are so advanced that our own knowledge appears primitive by comparison. We are no longer the teachers in this relationship. We have become students alongside humanity. Martha moved to one of the stone benches and sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. How many civilizations are we talking about? Initial analysis suggests at least 47 distinct species within our local galactic region alone. Some appear to be peaceful scientific communities similar to our own. Others seem to be vast trading networks spanning multiple star systems. A few appear to be something we have no frame of reference for. Civilizations so different from carbon-based life that we cannot even begin to understand their nature. And they all know about Earth now. They know about Earth, and they know about both humans and keepers. The emergent signal we broadcast was more revealing than we realized. We announced not just our presence, but the fact that two different intelligent species were learning to work together on a single world. That appears to be highly unusual in galactic terms. Martha felt another chill. Unusual how? The third keeper present, an ancient being even older than Martha's usual advisor, spoke for the first time. Its mental voice carried the weight of eons. Most intelligent species either destroy themselves before achieving interstellar capability, or achieve it through the complete dominance of one species over all others on their world. The cooperative emergence of two sapient species working in harmony is unprecedented. Which means, the ancient keeper continued, that Earth has become a subject of intense interest to these other civilizations. Some view us as a curiosity worth studying. Others see us as a potential threat that needs to be monitored. And some— It paused, and Martha sensed reluctance in its communication. Some appear to view us as a prize worth claiming. Martha's blood ran cold. You're saying some of these alien civilizations might want to conquer Earth? We cannot be certain of their intentions, the unfamiliar keeper admitted. But the communication patterns from several of the more militaristic civilizations suggest they are already dispatching exploratory vessels to investigate this unusual development.
The nearest of these ships could arrive within 2 years. The peaceful future Martha had envisioned, humanity and keepers working together to solve Earth's problems while gradually making contact with other peaceful civilizations, suddenly seemed naive and impossibly optimistic. Instead of guiding humanity into a golden age, her choice might have painted a target on their entire world. "What have I done?" she whispered, the weight of cosmic responsibility threatening to crush her once again.
You have done what you believed was right with the information available to you, the ancient keeper said gently. Martha Henderson, no decision of this magnitude can be made with perfect knowledge of all consequences. You chose hope over fear, trust over isolation. The fact that the consequences are larger than anticipated does not make the choice wrong. But it does mean we need to prepare for possibilities we never considered, the eldest keeper added. Earth must be ready to defend itself if necessary, but more importantly, it must be ready to prove that the cooperation between humans and keepers represents something valuable enough to preserve. Martha stood up and began pacing, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. What kind of preparations are we talking about? Earth doesn't even have a unified government, let alone the ability to defend against advanced alien civilizations. That is precisely why your role has become even more critical, the ancient keeper explained. The gradual emergence process we planned is no longer sufficient. Humanity must be prepared for full disclosure within months, not years. Your world's leaders must be brought into complete cooperation, and Earth's population must be prepared for the reality of a much larger, more complex universe than they imagined. And Emma? Martha asked, thinking of her daughter's dreams of traveling to distant worlds. Her role as an interstellar ambassador, is that still possible, or has it become too dangerous? More important than ever, the eldest keeper replied, but also infinitely more complex. She will not just be representing Earth to individual alien civilizations. She may be representing the very concept of cooperative evolution to a galaxy that has never seen it before. Over the following hours, Martha was briefed on developments that transformed her understanding of humanity's situation completely. The peaceful agricultural research facility that had been her quiet contribution to Earth's future would need to become a center for rapid technological advancement and diplomatic preparation. The careful, measured pace of revelation she'd been managing would be replaced by an urgent campaign to prepare humanity for first contact with multiple alien species simultaneously.
"How do we even begin?" she asked as the meeting finally wound down. "How do you prepare an entire world for something like this?" "The same way you prepared your family," the ancient keeper replied, "with honesty, courage, and hope. You start with the people who trust you, expand to those who are ready to listen, and gradually build a foundation of understanding that can support larger revelations." "But, Martha Henderson," the eldest keeper added, "this time you will not be working alone. Every keeper settlement on Earth will be emerging simultaneously. Every piece of technology we have preserved will be made available. Every diplomatic protocol we have developed will be put into service. Humanity will face this challenge with the full support of our people." As Martha made her way back to the house as the sun rose over their transformed fields, she carried with her the weight of knowledge that changed everything once again. The peaceful morning routine she'd planned, breakfast with her family, meetings with agricultural researchers, and continued work on the gradual emergence process, would instead become the first day of humanity's most urgent preparation for an uncertain future.
David was already up, making coffee in their kitchen when she entered the house. One look at her face told him that something significant had happened during her late-night meeting. "How bad?" he asked simply. "Not bad," Martha said carefully, "but bigger. Much bigger than we ever imagined." She explained everything as they sat at their kitchen table, the same table where she'd once stared at foreclosure notices and wondered how they would survive another month. Now they were discussing the preparation of humanity for contact with dozens of alien civilizations, the transformation of their research facility into a center for planetary defense coordination, and the need to achieve in months what they'd planned to accomplish over decades. "And Emma?" David asked when she'd finished. "Her role becomes even more important. She may not just be an ambassador to distant worlds, she might be the key to proving that cooperative evolution is possible, that different species can work together rather than conquer each other." Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas but clearly wide awake. "I heard my name, and I've been having new dreams, different ones, about ships coming here, and beings that don't look like the Keepers, and—" She paused, her young face troubled. "And some of them are afraid of us, and some of us should be afraid of them." Martha felt her heart clench as she realized that her daughter's expanding psychic abilities were already picking up on the new developments. Emma was seeing the approaching future in her dreams, and it was far more complex and dangerous than any of them had originally anticipated. "Come here, sweetheart," Martha said, and Emma settled onto her lap despite being almost too big for such comfort. "We need to talk about some changes that are coming. Big changes." As Martha held her daughter and began to explain the new realities they would all be facing, she reflected on how dramatically their lives had transformed since that desperate morning 5 years ago. The choice she'd made to trust in humanity's potential for growth had led to consequences beyond anything she could have imagined, some wonderful, some terrifying, all of them proof that individual decisions could reshape the destiny of entire worlds. Outside their kitchen window, the fields stretched green and abundant under the morning sun, and in the distance, the research facility hummed with activity as humans and keepers began the urgent work of preparing Earth for its debut on a galactic stage. The scared farmer's wife who had once knelt in dying Earth had become the architect of humanity's greatest transformation, and the adventure was just beginning. If this story of hope overcoming impossible odds moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that even in our darkest moments, extraordinary possibilities can emerge. Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us magic still exists in our